Okay, going back to our main protagonist here, Starboy.
Any luck with our mystery guest? I still haven't found a match for the name Thomas Kaller, or for his fingerprints, as if he doesn't exist.
He's paranoid schizophrenic, but his delusions are completely entrenched. Real space cadet stuff. His meds keep him calm, but nothing seems to snap him out of his delusional condition. Tell you one thing, though. He's been here 10 months, and so far, he's a model patient.
They're a lot better now that I know not to.
So that's Thomas Kaller, aka Starboy. And yes, he has schizophrenia. He lives with schizophrenia. That's an interesting take for a superhero. Usually we ascribe those conditions to people like Mad Hatter, Joker maybe, I don't know. But usually see it in the villain. Interesting to tackle this for a superhero, right? Superhero living with schizophrenia. How is it? Before we get into this, you might hear the term psychosis tossed around din. So what does psychosis mean? Is it similar to schizophrenia? Basically, psychosis is whenever the symptoms of thought and emotion are so severe that your perception of reality is already skewed. And usually, we talk about these kinds of symptoms, they will usually involve delusions and hallucinations. But you will see you may see psychosis outside schizophrenia as well. For example, in bipolar disorder or depression with psychotic features, it is possible where depression is predominant, but you might have psychotic features. But of course, in schizophrenia, definitely, it's a disorder that involves psychosis. So what do we mean when we say delusions? When we say delusions, we mean fixed beliefs inflexible to conflicting evidence. The most common one being persecutory, like the X is out to get me, the government, this person, this organization, there. And here I'd like to show you a video. Okay, so that's just one example of how persecutory delusions may be observed. Although you were already seeing the behavior, the thought process might not be something that is verbalized immediately, but this is how it may manifest as. There are other delusions as well, referential, like that person's talking about me. So the gestures, the comments, you think they're being directed at you. I know a person, he lives with schizophrenia. They would tell me that when they go out the street, they'd wear a jacket because they get the feeling that other people are talking about them. You know, that can be one way it comes out also. Or grandiose. I am a deity, or I have superpower, something like that. So those kinds of delusions. Erotomanic. So this is not the typical. Again, we're trying to differentiate normal from not expected. So some people can believe against evidence that the person is in love with them to an extent, but usually this can be corrected by presenting conflicting evidence to the contrary. So with erotomanic delusions, no amount of evidence will convince the person, even demonstration. Nihilistic, so convinced, things like it's the end of the world is ending, things like that. Somatic delusions involve false beliefs with regards to health, but there will be an overlap with the bizarre delusions later on because they tend to be more out of this world. Something like organs are melting, or my liver has been replaced by something like that. So there might be some confusion there when we get to the next one, which is bizarre delusions. Bizarre. This one is like the aliens came and took my brain, something like that. So it's clearly implausible, and you also have to consider cultural context here because when it comes to mental health conditions, culture plays a role. Like when you go to certain indigenous tribes here in the Philippines, there may be some cultural practices that resemble hallucinations, but to them it's normal. But if you were to run the DSM-5, for example, for them, they would be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Okay, so I think you've seen the header there, DSM. I mentioned that earlier also. What does it mean? It's the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual of the American Psychological Association. So it's basically the diagnostic criteria for mental health conditions It's usually one of the two gold standards used in the world, along with the International Classification of Diseases 10, ICD-10. I'll re-emphasize this when we get to depression, but I just want to emphasize here and now again that when we talk about the DSM, this is a consensus-based diagnostic criteria. What do I mean? It's not like with diabetes mellitus type 2 that you have a lab test, you have a quantitative determination that, oh, you have diabetes, ganyan. Oh, you have schizophrenia, your dopamine is ganyan. No, walang ganyan. This changes with the additions depending on how the working group will decide, the field validation of the diagnostic criteria, sensitivity, specificity, all of that. But this is not very quantitative yet. There's only one, actually, quantitative parameter in the DSM that would be in a certain sleep-wake disorder. So, tsaka na yan. Anyway, back to the symptoms and symptoms. Hallucinations. These are vivid, clear, and voluntary perceptions without external stimuli. My friend, when they talk about it, this one is the hallucination. They talk about shadow figures. They will see a lot of shadow figures. And sometimes mixed with delusions, the hallucinations can end up fueling the delusions also. You have the most common one being auditory. So I'll show a demonstration of auditory hallucinations later on, but you also have visual. So tactile, how does tactile work? So my friend would describe it as they felt bugs crawling under their skin. It can be a tactile hallucination. Olfactory, you may smell something that's not there. But anyway, this can occur with any sensory modality, basically. And how is this gone about? Positive symptoms, both hallucinations and delusions, are mediated through the mesolimbic pathway. So the neurons, they start at the ventral tegmental area and they project towards the dopaminergic neurons in the nucleus accumbens. What do these mean? These pathways, one of the 5 dopaminergic pathways that are involved in schizophrenia or in antipsychotic efficacy side effects. This one in particular is involved in the positive symptoms, so not just hallucinations, but also delusions. Because the nucleus accumbens there, that's the reward center. So you have dopaminergic neurons firing into the reward center responsible for motivation, arousal. You know that feeling when you have like a really good meal and you squirm in your seat, or when you do something that's generally pleasurable, a hobby, something that you really enjoy and you feel really good. That's the dopamine activating your reward system in the nucleus accumbens by binding to the corresponding dopamine type 2 receptors there. And yeah, so there might also be some agitation involved there. With positive symptoms, we link it to an increase kasi in dopamine. So with an increase in dopamine, we see the hallucinations, the delusions, as well as maybe a bit of agitation. We have the dopamine, excess dopamine binding a lot to the D2 type receptor. So the dopamine 2 type receptor causing the positive symptoms. Later on, I'll talk about glutamate's role. Tsaka na yan kasi isang buong pathway pa yan. Pero the mesolimbic pathway, positive symptoms of schizophrenia. So for hallucinations and delusions, you have from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens. An excess of dopamine firing there, hallucinations, delusions, a bit of agitation as well. Okay, for the hallucination simulation, particularly auditory hallucinations.
Package. Poison package.
Hang on, never open poison.
Coming for you.
Stop it
now. Don't listen, stupid. So dumb. So dumb.
Make a list, you ungrateful. Make up a list of
built to protect St. Augustine from invaders. It's now a great place to escape the smell of the 7,000 tourists.
They know it's
Why aren't you doing what we said?